Hi, I'm Maggie.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Annalisa. We're a team of mental health professionals from Unleashed Counseling, and this is Bibliotherapy, your self-help book club podcast. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
So we are just finishing up Luuvie Ajayi's book, I'm Judging You, the Do Better Manual. And I laughed so hard in reading this book and listening to it. I switched back and forth between the audio and the paperback. She's a brilliant writer. She's such a sharp comedian, like her wit. Oh my God, I got so many paper cuts like listening to this audio book.
I listened to it as well. I listened to the entire thing and kind of took notes to outline. And it some of, again, like her one-liners that she just like sneaks in there. It's like you do a spit take with your water sometimes because of how funny, and it just catches you off guard. It's so funny.
It's amazing and it is hilarious, but she also gets a great point across at the same time. Like that's a true talent to be able to use comedy in such a way that really brings a lot of different big things to light, you know?
Yeah, so the big question whenever we finish one of these books is, will you recommend it to your clients and your friends?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it because it's hard to get into the self-help genre. We've talked about that a few times, and I think this would actually be a good place to start because it's so, off grid of self-help.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I think I would recommend this for clients, especially because a lot of the topics. I mean, she touches upon all of the things in this book, and I think that she says it in such a way that doesn't feel like it's a textbook. So it's not like she's using all of these technical terms that might be confusing to people who aren't in the counseling realm. But they also are very down to earth and in a way that is up to date with, our technology, with the things that we are faced with in day-to-day life, and relates a lot of these bigger issues of race, transphobia, homophobia, being misogynistic, like all those different pieces are in this book, but in a way that is relatable, and is like digestible for somebody who is looking to, check their privilege or to learn more about other people's, perspectives in life.
Yeah, so you said that it's relatable. And so based on the title, which she says from the very beginning, I'm judging you. She says in the intro, I'm judging us all, I'm judging myself, right? So did you feel judged as you were reading and listening to it?
So 110%. I feel like, and not in a way that I felt like I was being judged and like being like chastised, but it's like a judgment to check myself. As a cisgender, heterosexual, white female, there are parts of that sentence that I just said that really give me privilege in this world, right? And so part of it is reading the book and being like, okay, hey, let's just take a little bit of an evaluation here of how I am as a person, what my biases are, where do I feel like I'm fitting in this book. And I'm already judging myself to begin with, even before reading this book, right? But it gives me a space to hear from, especially someone else's perspective that is not from, especially a white perspective, and telling me, hey, here's how our perspective is, right? Here's my perspective. And here are the things that would be helpful from somebody who is speaking, from a more privileged space. These are the things that you can do to help these other populations. So yeah, like I felt judged, but it was more of like, a fire under my ass to use the privilege that I have and to educate myself so I'm a better counselor and just a human being in general.
Yeah, so when I was reading it, I actually didn't feel judged. I felt sort of comforted. And so I was reflecting on that. And I was like, what is it about the way she's speaking? Because she says over and over again, I'm judging you. And she names like certain things you could be doing that she's judging you for. And like, I definitely saw myself in the text over and over again. But I was like, oh, thanks for telling me. I'm gonna do that now. Like, I'm gonna put lotion on my legs now. Like, I wasn't doing that before, and I appreciate you letting me know that that's ridiculous, and I'm being judged for that. So I don't know. I felt comforted in the way that she just hilariously like laid all of this out. Like, here's some things you're doing. Let's talk about your hashtags. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing hashtags wrong. Good to know. Gonna fix it.
It's interesting, Lisa, like hearing your perspective too of the judgment, right? Like, I feel like after hearing both of you guys talk about like what your thoughts were of like feeling judged or not, like there were definitely places like I don't use hashtags. So like I think I felt judged for the fact that I don't use hashtags and I'm not really like up to date of like how that works. And there are certain parts of there where I was just like, yeah, I totally do that, but I'm not the only one. So like I can totally see that comfort that you're talking about. But yeah, it's an interesting, just like an interesting thought of like perspectives of whether like knowing that somebody's saying like I'm judging you, the point I feel like for her was like everybody's judging everybody and you're judging yourself, and this is a book of all of those judgments that you're probably having for yourself, but we're going to do it in the comfort of a book and to show you that you're not the only one who's feeling that way.
Yeah, there's some normalization there. I'm not the only one, and also we can do better, right? She's laying it out there for you. Here's some ways that you can do better. So let's dig into part 2, which is called culture. And I wish we had time to just like dig deep into every one of the chapters in this section because they were all so good. Racism is for assholes, the privilege principle. Zamunda is not a country, neither is Africa. Rape culture is real and it sucks. Nobody wins at the feminism Olympics. Homophobia is gay, GEIGH. And hashtag fix it Jesus, hashtag bind it Buddha, hashtag amend it Allah. So, so they were all incredible chapters that took very serious issues and brought in her humor. She is a comedian after all, but she brought these issues to light in a way that you're not laughing maliciously. You're laughing at the absurdity of some of the things that are happening in the world, maybe laughing at yourself a little bit. I'll speak in the first person, laughing at myself a little bit, and also thinking seriously about how we can just authentically like be better humans to each other. So in the chapter on racism, she has a couple of subtitles that I wanted to read out loud. Racism is not always white hoods and burning crosses. Sometimes it's suits and boardrooms. Racism is not always white hoods and burning crosses. Sometimes it's blue uniforms and black robes. Racism is not always white hoods and burning crosses. It is behind teachers' desks and in principals' offices. Racism is not always white hoods and burning crosses. It is on anchor desks and in headlines. Racism is not always white hoods and burning crosses. It is on Wall Street and on Capitol Hill. And for the purpose of our conversation, I want to add another one to her list. Racism is not always white hoods and burning crosses. It is sometimes in the counseling room. So multicultural counseling is something that a lot of people talk about doing. And part of the reason for that is because the American Psychological Association asks master's level counseling programs to include a diversity and culture class in almost all other programs. So most counselors and therapists that you work with will have taken a class at least and know that it's important to embrace the idea of multicultural counseling. but does everybody actually do it? Does everyone take it seriously? And where are these counselors in the process of coming to terms with their identities, right? Their limitations, their privileges. So I don't know, Nicole, what are your thoughts about multicultural counseling?
I think about, being fresh out. I keep saying fresh out of school. It happened like a year ago, but it feels like yesterday. And I think about how some people can take our multicultural class and treat it as a class, and just keep it in that one class. Whereas there are so many things. I remember in that textbook, it talks about literally every single aspect of counseling. If you are working in drug and alcohol, if you are working in family systems, if you are working anywhere, you are going to be talking about some sort of cultural aspect with a client. And I think that that piece is not always woven into every single class. It is treated like one class, and you're supposed to apply it yourself. And for some people, that might be difficult depending on their experiences, and their thoughts on how to disseminate all of those thoughts in multicultural counseling into all the different facets of counseling, right? And to not only be like, oh, like check it off the box of I took this class, but putting it into your whole entire time in school, and then continuing the education and the principles outside of the classroom. And that is really, that part is even more vital than just having the class on the class list. And I feel like in some ways, depending on where you're coming, right, like what your perspective is, where you're coming from, what school you went to, where your school's located, that really can put either a make or break on if you're really utilizing multicultural counseling in the way that it was designed. Because it's not supposed to just be like let's look at the demographics of our client and pick out the things that we think are going to be applicable, right? It's supposed to be a conversation. It's supposed to be a part of the counseling discussion. And it's also for, again, I'm going to say, check yourself as the counselor and make sure that you're giving the appropriate care, and you are also communicating with our client what's appropriate and what is desirable for what you're doing in the counseling room, right? And making sure that you're not imposing your own judgments and your own culture onto a client just because that's what you think is supposed to be happening.
Right. That is so critical right there, what you just said, because if we don't take the time to explore our own identities, to explore our own privilege, and truly understand how that's influenced us as humans, as parents, as friends, and of course, as therapists, we're blind to our own limitations. And so that's when racism can enter the counseling room. And here we are thinking we're doing something good, we're doing a great job, and we're shutting our eyes to the racist comments or approaches or beliefs that we came by because this is the culture we live in, not because we're bad people, right? Or not because we're actually, like what did she say, the white hoods and burning crosses, but because racism is imbued in every aspect of American culture. If we're not serious about digging it out of ourselves, it's going to show up when we're counseling people.
Hey there, Bibliotherapy listeners. When you're finished listening, head on over to selfcaretips.org/free guide to check out our awesome guide that is full of ideas to practice self-care. Here's why you should grab up this free guide now. Because we love you, because you deserve a break, because if you continue to go at the pace you're going, you'll burn out, and because you may actually have forgotten how to even do self-care. What are you waiting for? Head over to selfcaretips.org/free guide and give yourself permission to do that thing that makes you happy.
So on page 85, Luuvie talks about when she was in college and she was training to become a paraprofessional, her counseling center, and she was introduced to this privilege exercise, which I remember doing in one of my counseling courses, probably the diversity course. So everybody stands in a line, and the professor will name certain aspects of your experience or identity and ask you to either step forward or step back if you've experienced it. So if you are left-handed, take a step back, right? If you have never had to worry about where your next meal would come from, it's one of her examples, step forward. You know, if you're able to marry the person that you love, you know, without discrimination, step forward. So the questions are asking you to get really specific about your actual experiences. They're not just naming your labels. And so it makes you really think about what the folks around you have gone through in their lifetimes. And when you finish the exercise, you'll notice that most of the straight, white, cisgender men are going to be at the very front of the line. They've won the so-called race. And the more identities that you have that are part of vulnerable populations, so the LGBTQ, if you're a Black or brown person, so you're going to be like further back in the line. And it's one of the most stark and wonderful exercises you can do to start exploring your privilege in a very real way. So she brought back that memory for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I wish I could ask people in high school. I wish I could ask everybody to participate in this exercise, because it just takes some of the maybe shame away from the privilege that you experience and makes you start thinking about like what this looks like in real life and how can I do better, as she says.
I love that exercise because it doesn't do that marginalizing of, you know, oh, here's where, you know, we think you are going to fall based off of what we can see. And it's really, that's a big part of that multicultural counseling piece too, of we could read any textbook telling us about what kind of things can come up for somebody of the LGBTQ community or of somebody who is from a like a different country coming into the United States, depending on what their culture is, right? Like all of those things can be read about, but just because they look like that happened, right? Or they look like something that you might have read before does not mean that it actually is their experience. So asking those questions is huge.
Yeah, and so I would love to speak to all of my fellow counselors and therapists, you know, in paraphrasing Luuvie Ajayi, asking us to do better, right? Like we've got to actually work at this. We have to check our privilege and be willing to talk about these tough conversations in the counseling room. It starts, and when I'm training people, when I'm training interns, I encourage them to have the conversation about culture in the first or second session. Don't wait. And a lot of us in this profession are white women, right? And so it can feel uncomfortable to have these conversations, but being willing to face that discomfort and say, you know, okay, these are my identities that you can see, right, on my skin and on my person, and some of those identities are different from yours. So what will that mean for your counseling experience? And have you ever experienced discrimination, racism, you know, homophobia, any of these things? And even if your client says, you know, it's, you know, whatever, it's fine that you're straight, or it's fine that you're white, whatever, I'm not worried about that. That's usually the polite, like, initial response that folks give. They know that you're now open to that conversation. You're willing to talk about racism. You're willing to talk about your differences and your similarities, and honor their experiences, their authentic experiences. And if we wait to have that conversation, there's a big question mark over your head, right? Is this person secretly racist? Is this person secretly, you know, against gay marriage or whatever? And we don't want our clients to be worried about us. We want them to be focused on themselves. So we got to from the very beginning, be willing to say, I'm here to have this conversation. I'm here to be with you wherever you are.
Yeah, and it makes it even for the client to feel comfortable answering honestly. Because like you were saying, yeah, like a lot of times that politeness is, oh yeah, like not a problem, or no, I've never experienced any kind of discrimination, right? Because in those first, like, 10, 15 minutes of meeting, they're not sure, what your thoughts are going to be. And like we think of like our practice and the kind of affirming counseling that we promote, right? But like, oh, it still is, you don't know me as a person, right, yet as a client. So coming in and me mentioning, hey, like, culture, even especially if we come from a different culture, it's going to be a little uncomfortable. But by us being the ones in the position to bring up the conversation and to try and make it feel more comfortable, it can become more of an honest and open conversation. And things might come up that they really do want to work on.
And it's reducing some of that power differential too, right? Like we don't want a big gap in power in the counseling room. We want this to be a partnership. And so just facing those tough conversations from the very beginning is part of what sort of puts the ball back in your client's court where it should be. I wanted to point out that in chapter 13, the hashtag Fix It Jesus chapter, she really talks a lot about how people have weaponized religion and used it to draw out differences and to hurt people. And she owns her identity as a Christian, right? She says very clearly, I'm Christian, I love Jesus, this is who I am and what I believe, and I love that about myself and about my family. And also, I'm not going to discriminate against anyone else because of that. And I'm not okay with extremists, in any, whether you're atheist or a Christian or another religion, I'm not okay with that extremism and that trying to like hurt other people with your religion. And it struck me as I was reading it or listening to it actually, that she was really demonstrating how you can acknowledge your privilege, right? So to be a Christian in America, right? There's definitely some privilege with that identity. And you can use that to turn to the other people that share that identity with you and say, I'm calling you out. You should not be treating other people this way. You should not be weaponizing our shared religion. And I thought about how like that's such a wonderful example, and I want to bring it back to white privilege, right? Like that's what we should be doing as white people. We should be standing up and saying, I'm going to interrupt your racist joke right now because that's not okay when we're together. Or I'm going to call out this policy that we have that's clearly, harming the Black and brown people in our business or whatever, right? So being willing to actually stand up and say that stuff is hard, but it has to happen. And I loved how she practiced what she preached, right? In that chapter.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a great message of like using, just because you are in a group that is considered privileged, right, does not mean that you have nowhere to talk in this conversation. You are absolutely the person who really needs to be talking in this conversation because you have the platform. And it is helping and beneficial to the populations that you are talking about and trying to advocate for by using your privilege in a way that is positive and helpful, and is inclusive. And especially with her saying about with Christianity, yeah, there's so many different facets of Christianity that have a lot of rhetoric that is against a lot of different populations. And to be able to say, yes, I'm Christian, and to also follow that with, and I am going to stand for the people who don't have the voice or are having problems getting their voice out there because of discrimination is really big.
Whoa, I'm sweaty. This is like, this is a rich conversation, but also sort of a tough conversation, right? To read Luuvie Ajayi's work and then analyze and pick it apart and then put it out there for the whole world to listen is uncomfortable. But I love this book and I'm glad we did it. I'm glad we read it. I think this is an awesome one to finish out this season with.
I agree. Dare I say that the people listening might be judging us for how we are talking about this book?
Right? Yep. And we can handle
Maybe Luuvie is too.
I think she would probably say absolutely. Judging all of us. There's always room to do better, right?
Oh yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, and if for anyone who's interested, who's listening, her Luuvie's second book is, I think, recently just came out, and she's kind of promoting it right now on her social media. It's called Professional Troublemaker, which is what she calls herself. So that's her next one. We're not going to be talking about it because we're going to be taking a break from bibliotherapy for the summer, right? So we're kind of encouraging everybody to go sit by the water, sit at the beach or the lake, and grab some of your favorite fiction and just indulge in reading. It doesn't have to be self-help, can be any genre that you love. Just make sure you do some summer reading because it's one of our favorite self-care activities, right? So we encourage it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we will be back in the fall with a new and exciting way of doing bibliotherapy.
All right, guys. Till next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye.